Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Mike Williams. Pack your bags, we are off to Tallahassee, Florida, US of A. Let's go.
Sin and Tonic!
No gin for me today, loves, because I was celebrating something very exciting last night and I drank too much. So apologies if I look a little worse for wear. Without further ado, let's crack on. 16th of December, the year 2000. Into the year 3001. Yeah. Tallahassee, Florida. This date was the anniversary of a married couple, Mike and Denise Williams. That morning, Mike went on a duck hunting trip to Lake Seminole, and he planned to be home mid-afternoon, early afternoon, so that he could then celebrate his anniversary with his wife. But Mike did not return home. When Denise couldn't get hold of Mike and it had gone well past the time where he should have been back, she decided to call for help. She called friends, family, and then the police, and a search party was sent out to the lake. Mike's car was at the lake, but that day they could not even find his boat. Really worrying. I think it must be a very huge lake. I'll share some pictures and statistics. The next day, the search party continued and they then found Mike's boat out on the lake, but no Mike. The search party would continue for weeks. Tragically, I think everyone knew that they were searching for Mike's body, and it was thought that he had fallen out of the boat and there had been some sort of accident, but even perhaps that he'd been eaten by alligators. Mike's body was never recovered from the lake. Mike's mum, and I must admit I'm with her on this one because I've never actually personally heard of a whole adult being completely eaten by an alligator. Never heard of that. There's always some evidence that that has happened. Mike's mum did not believe that he had fallen in and been eaten. She thought something fishy was going on, pardon the pun. Even the investigators and the people searching said it was really unlikely that an adult would be completely devoured by alligators. There would be evidence of it, but the whole lake had been extensively searched. So while it was really odd that not a single thing had been found, nothing, other than his boat, there was no evidence of Mike having ever been in that lake. Nothing. No, not even a sock. And then to add to the weirdness of the whole thing, 6 months after Mike disappeared, his waders and his jacket were found in the lake. But this wasn't a case of like, oh, maybe they were trapped somewhere under a rock or they were stuck and tangled in some weeds and then eventually they'd work their way out. The waders and the jacket looked like they had just been put into the water. So that is very suspicious. Also, the waders, the jacket, they had no rip marks or, anything to indicate that an alligator might have bitten into the clothes. They knew it was Mike's gear because in the pocket of the jacket, I believe, was his hunting license. This just made Mike's mum even more insistent that something was not right here. So she tirelessly campaigned for his case to be continued, for them to still search for him, and for people not to give up. But sadly, Mike's disappearance or death was unexplained for 16 years. In 2004, she had just put so much pressure onto the department that his case was actually reopened because it was a cold case. His poor mum ended up writing 2,600 letters to the governor about Mike's disappearance. She never ever stopped. And when they reopened the case, what they discovered was, this is even more like, what is going on? They discovered that alligators in the winter, so don't forget he went missing on the 16th of December, alligators in the winter don't eat. It's too cold. So there was all this science around it. So it basically proved that theory wrong, in which case, how does a body just get out of a lake? It does not. However, there was absolutely zero evidence that anything else could have happened, and so the case went cold again. Now, I thought it was slightly odd that on their wedding anniversary, Mike would choose to go duck hunting that morning, each to their own, but I just found that a bit bizarre. like of all the days. However, all was not going well in their marriage. And actually, maybe spending the entire day together with somebody that you are not that into at the moment might be a bit of a stretch. So he went off duck hunting. Denise had actually promised a rekindling of their marriage that evening, and they were going to go and stay in a B&B and, have a romantic evening. She thought that might help, but it didn't get to happen. Mike and Denise had been high school sweethearts alongside another couple. So these two couples, they were at school together, and then their friendship remained all the way through into adulthood, and they stayed together as couples. The other couple was Brian and Catherine Winchester. That just makes me think of the pub in Shaun of the Dead. Go to the Winchester. Both couples were incredibly close. They had been double dating, spending time together ever since school. So they were incredibly close. They married at a similar time. They had children at a similar time. When they had children, obviously that is quite stressful when you have new children. The couples would often go out and drink and, let off steam together. But Denise was unhappy with Mike. She had fallen out of love with Mike, really. From what I could read, that's what had happened there. Mike was incredibly hardworking. Mike had grown up without very much. They weren't rich by any means. And he didn't want the same for his family, so he worked very hard. He was earning loads of money, like 200 grand a year. And this was like back in the day, before 2000. So they were rich. But it came at a price, and that was him working incredibly hard. So from what I could gather, he was either working long hours, long days. I think he began as a property appraiser, not sure what that is, and then went into real estate. So he was either doing that a lot or duck hunting. So, yeah. However, many people said when they had their daughter, he absolutely doted on her. But again, that could also, if you're busy at work, you're working long hours, you do your hobby of duck hunting, and you're doting on your daughter, wife, she's got to come into the equation, hasn't she? So she felt neglected. But Denise, she was not interested in sharing all of this information with her close friend, Catherine. Oh no. She was more interested in getting her needs met with Brian. And this had actually all began before they even had their children. So when they started meeting up more as couples, when they had their kids, they were actually having an affair. I just can't even. This isn't a stranger. This is like her husband's best friend. I mean, they're all friends, but what? Awful. And then you start meeting up with them as a couple more often and going out together. Like, what the hell? That is one poker face. That is. And this affair had gone on for years. And eventually, Brian and Denise fell in love. And they desperately wanted to be together. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. Mike, I apologise if I get their names. Because I don't know. Because there's like this deceit. I feel like I'm going to say Mike when I mean Brian, and Brian when I mean... Do you know what I mean? So if I notice that, I'll write the right name. Let's see if I can do it without getting it wrong. So Mike would go away quite a lot with work, and sometimes he would say to his wife, "Oh, do you fancy coming on this trip?" So in the evenings and stuff, they could eat together, and, that's nice. Yeah, sure, sweetheart, that's so lovely. Love it, love it, love it. Guess what? She would tell Brian, "Oh, little trip to wherever. Do you fancy it?" In the daytime, so Brian would come along on the trips. He'd drive separately, obviously, and he would book a hotel nearby. And then in the day, when I'm acting like this never happened. It happens all the time. But I can't believe it. I never can believe it. The audacity of the lies. So in the daytime, when Mike is working, because that's what you do when you're going away on work things, in the daytime, Mike's working. Brian and Denise, jolly good time in a hotel. Unbelievable. And then come the evening, what was that? That was scary. And then come the evening time, oh, dutiful wife Denise becomes suddenly to Mike. It gets worse because Mike, poor Mike, I feel so sorry for Mike. He would confide in his best friend. Who else are you going to confide in but your best mate? That he was having problems in his marriage. How can you sit and listen to that? How can you be having a beer with your best mate, and you're the one having an affair with his wife? Mike even said to Brian, I think she might be having an affair. And he told Brian that they were no longer sleeping together. And Brian was like, ooh, he liked that. That made him happy because he was in love now with Denise. And even though Mike is Denise's husband, Brian didn't want her to have sex with him, with Mike, her own husband. He was like, no, that whole, it's just icky. So what to do? How many times have we had this situation where someone wants to be with someone else and divorce? That would be far too easy. Denise said that she would not like to get divorced because she was from a very religious family, Christian, I believe, and that was not the done thing, and it would bring far too much shame on the family to get a divorce. She also said that she did not want to share custody of their daughter. That was, didn't want to do that. Right? So adultery and murder, totally okay. No shame on the family with those ones. Never get that. What? So the pair plotted Mike's demise. There were many plans thrown around. I always think about that, what are you doing? Having a glass of wine? Cup of tea? Is it over dinner? Where do you have these conversations where you're scheming and plotting to murder somebody? And all of the different ways as well. All of the different ways. In one plan, Denise, Catherine, the four of them were going to go out on a boat trip and whatever, and they were going to push Mike and Catherine overboard. What the fuck? Wow. They settled on making it look like an accident. A boating accident. And you will never guess what good old Brian does for a living. Did. What do we think? This case just says so many, what? There's so many layers to it. Brian sells life insurance. What do you know? How handy. Brian already had some life insurance, and I think it totaled £750,000. That's not enough. Oh no, that's not enough. But apparently it was an old policy. Does it matter? It's still going to pay out, but anyhow. So before Mike's trip to the lake, she convinced him to take out a further, more recent life insurance policy. And this one would be £1 million. So in total, he would have 1,000,007. What? How do you say that number? 1.7 million? What? 1,750,000. The two added together, that number. Frick. Brian happily helped Mike sort out his policy, obviously. And when Mike's waders and jacket appeared in the lake 6 months after his disappearance death, Denise pushed very, very hard to have Mike declared dead, because until somebody is legally declared dead, if there's no body, you can't cash in on any life insurance policies. So Denise was quite keen, to make sure that got done. 5 years after Mike's death, Brian and Denise get married. So in between that time, so when Mike disappeared and 5 years into the future after that, Brian has separated and divorced with Catherine. And I believe amicably. The reason I say that is because when Brian then went on to marry Denise, Catherine and Denise, they remained friends. So, strange one. But anyway, so I think it was all amicable, and she certainly did not know about the affair. Their marriage raised suspicions. So much so that the police reopened the case and they looked into things, and they found that 19 days while they were still searching for Mike, Denise had filed for her life insurance policies, but she was not waiting. Oh, I mean, she didn't get them there and then because he wasn't dead. He wasn't declared dead, but she'd applied for them then. Like, what? No hope. Like Mike's poor mum was like, we've not found his body until we have a body. I'm going to believe that he's okay. All of this business. No. Denise was like, right, file for the insurance policies ASAP. What the heck? And again, so frustrating. But there was no, other than suspicion being raised when these two get married and a hunch, the police had nothing. So they had to just drop the case. They had to leave it. They had to leave it alone because they had absolutely nothing on them. And then, this is where it gets spicy. And I enjoy this moment. I really do, because it's special to watch. It is special to watch the downfall of somebody that is so sure of themselves and so full of themselves, and somebody that is vile. Just, the unravelling that follows is divine. 16 years later, Denise walks into a police station to report a crime. Turns out, I feel like I am spilling the tea with this one. I feel like I'm like, oh, let me tell you now. Turns out her marriage to Brian was not the fairy tale that she had hoped it would be. And talk about shame. Because it would seem that Brian, well, he had some problems, and I'm not sure, take this with a pinch of salt, but I feel like it was true that Brian had a problem and that he would seek the assistance of women and pay them for their services. And this all became apparent, and like God-loving Denise and all the shame that things bring on her and her family, she was like, oh no, not for me. And so she was filing for divorce. They had actually separated in 2012, and she's walking into this police station in 2016. So they have been separated for 4 years at this point. The divorce has not gone through yet. So what crime is she reporting, I hear you ask? Well, it's a juicy one. That morning, she had got into her car and she was driving along. Off she goes on her way to work. And all of a sudden she sees in her mirror, and this must be terrifying, somebody climbing out from the boot, the trunk, like climbing out over the back seats of the car. What the deuce? It was Brian, and he had a gun, which he held at her side, and he was directing her, like, turn this way, turn that way. But she refused to do so. She was not going to be following his instructions. So he was threatening to hurt her and use the gun, but she was still driving, so she just carried on, and she drove to CVS. Is that a shop of some description? I'm going to Google it. When she got there, she pulled up near to the outside front of the shop, so that, like, it was quite clever really, but where it's most likely to have CCTV cameras. And basically what happened was Brian was having a breakdown. Brian was very sad. Brian was losing his family. He was losing his wife, and his whole world was crumbling around him, and he lost his brain. He lost his brain, it fell out, and he was now holding his wife, because they're still married, at gunpoint. So that is armed kidnap, apparently. So, and it quite a hefty sentence for that one. After an hour or so of trying to really talk Brian down, just chat with him, be kind to him, get him on side, like breathe, Brian went to the back of the car, he still had the gun, and he loaded some plastic sheeting into a rucksack and a big bottle of like bleach. That's strange. He then got out of the car and he left. He walked off. Denise then drove to the nearest police station, and I'm going to say now that that was a brazen move. Brazen move. Now that might be because Brian and Denise have a dark, terrible secret that only the two of them know. They know that Mike would never be found in Lake Seminole because Brian had buried Mike's body after killing him 16 years ago. So it really does feel like a brazen move for Denise to go to the police. Oh, right. Because even though she was probably scared for her life, and Brian must have frightened her that morning, big time, Maybe she got to the police station before she'd even thought and registered it in her head. But the thing is, up to this point, Denise has gotten away with a very long affair, insurance fraud, because, you know, the life insurance policies on Mike, and plotting murder. So maybe she does have a bit of a, oh, you know, nothing can touch me attitude. Because if you're going to get Brian arrested for armed kidnapping, how the hell do you know that he's not going to suddenly, you know, he's a broken man? I think she was a bit stupid. Why did she go? This is a broken man on the edge, and you are going to dob him in to the police. What is to say that he's not going to spill the beans? Like, he could just tell everything. So it was a brazen, stupid move on Denise's part, but thank God. The police are rubbing their hands together when she comes in. At first, they're very professional. They take her statement. They hear all about what's happened that morning. And, you know, they take her version of events, jot it down. She's there for ages, like hours, going over what's happened this morning with Brian. But they know that their ultimate goal is to question her about Mike's disappearance. So, guess what? Her brother-in-law is a police officer. So they get him in, get him on the phone, get him in, and he starts to interview her. And very carefully and slowly, he basically starts to say, look, we know that Brian is a bad man. We know that he is violent. He has a temper. We know that he has a gun and he's threatened to use it before. I think there was an incident where, surprise, surprise, Brian found out that Denise was cheating on him. I mean, come on, man. She had like an affair with you, her husband's best friend. Why is she going to keep it in her pants for you? Is that a terminology that you use for a woman? But anyway, that. And he went to Vegas, Brian, to confront her and her lover, Chuck, I think he was called Chuck, with a gun. And it was, you know, quite extreme, quite angry.
I don't think you had anything to do with it, but he held that over you, and I'm sure at some point he told you something. And I'm not trying to get you in trouble because I don't think you did anything, Denise. But I'm telling you, he killed Mike, and he was going to kill you and make you go away. You need to hear that, and you need to hear it a lot. You were going to die today. You got lucky. Okay? Next time, it might be he catches Ansley and you, and he kills Ansley in front of you just to hurt you. And if you leech to cover his tracks, why doesn't it make sense? He's nuts. He killed your husband.
But if he is nuts, that crazy, then again, I can't have an officer live with me 24/7. I can't. I'm not safe.
He goes to prison for murder. You'll never see him again. He killed Mike. And he buried Mike where no one could ever find him. That is what he has done. And he's willing to do it again. He is going to kill you. It's just me and you. I swear I would never tell them.
But she knows that she was involved in Mike's murder, that she plotted the whole thing, maybe even was the mastermind behind it. So she doesn't want to implicate Brian in Mike's murder. No way. So she is a clever cookie and she avoids it at every turn. In the end, she gets arsey because she's like, I'm here to talk about what he did this morning. I don't want to talk about Mike, Schmike. No. This isn't what I'm doing here. I don't want anything to happen about Mike. No, I don't believe he killed him. I want you to arrest him for this situation. I want you to keep me and my daughter safe, right? Come on, love. And you start to see her very confident demeanour sort of diminish.
I can't leave the Mike thing alone because I'm telling you, Denise.
I'll start thinking about
he not only did that, he choreographed the recovery of Mike's waiters. I was there for a week. And maybe that's what the fright is, that, I'm going to get in trouble for that. Well, that's his doing. He did that. Okay? But I'm telling you, he is so manipulative. He is a murderer. He killed Mike.
He was hunting in the morning, and he was going to go with a friend he had from work, a young kid. I can't think of his name. He's moved to Jacksonville. I don't know.
During her time in the police station, Denise sent some text messages, and one of them was to Catherine, her old friend. And she said to Catherine, please tell Brian that I've spoken to the police and I haven't told them anything. Now that implies, like, look, I'm here, but I haven't said a word about Mike, so, okay? So she asked Catherine to get that message to Brian. Suspicious. The police ended up using Catherine to get as much information as they could out of Denise. So they did that thing where they, like, tap the phones, record the phone call. Sophie. And Catherine's, like, asking her questions and saying, like, I know that you and Brian did it. Brian's told me that you plotted and killed Mike and blah, blah, blah. But Denise is clever. She doesn't admit to it, but she never, ever once denies it. You know, she's not like, oh, how could you? I never. None of that. She's just like, oh, what do you know? Yeah. So she doesn't admit, but she does not deny. And then Brian is arrested. Of course he's going to be arrested. He's kidnapped his wife. And he is offered the frickin' deal of the century. He's unbelievable. Tell us everything about the murder of Mike and the plotting of that murder and the execution of that murder, and you will have immunity. What? That is not... you don't often hear that, do you? Not in real life. They said that he would be convicted of the kidnapping, the armed kidnapping of his wife, and that he would be given a sentence of 20 years. So they told him all of this information. They were like, this is what we will do. This is the deal. It's a done deal. But you have to tell the truth. And if we find out that you've lied about anything, the whole deal is off the table and you will then be charged with murder. And he also had to take officers to Mike's body. And he took that deal.
I don't know how to word it exactly, but we could feel better about ourselves if there was a chance that he could make it out of it. You know, I mean, I think there was even talk about, well, it'll be up to God what happens and not us. It won't be a murder. It'll be an accident. It's kind of screwed up thinking. But the plan with Mike was that I would meet him at a gas station. I met him there. I had told him that we were going to go to a secret special spot to go hunting. I was in the back of the boat driving, and he was in the front, and we headed out. We got to that area that I knew was a deep area. I basically stopped the boat and got him to stand up, and when he did, I pushed him into the water. So he was in the water. He was struggling. What I eventually realized was he was taking the waders and the jacket off. And he got those off, and that area of the lake had a lot of dead trees that come up out of the water, and there's a lot of stumps that come up out of the water. He was panicking. I was panicking. None of this was like going how I thought it was going to go. He started to yell. And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And so I had my gun in the boat, so I loaded my gun and ended up circling closer towards him, and he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him in the head.
Williams, we, the jury, find as follows as to count one of the indictment. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As to count two, we, the jury, find the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder.
Brian said that it was all very carefully orchestrated. The night before the murder, he took his then wife, Catherine, to a concert, and he got her bladdered. He got her really drunk so that she would sleep in the morning. He didn't tell his wife or anybody that he was going out on the lake that morning with Mike. After he had shot Mike, he had to get Mike's body out of the water, into the boat, and then took it back to where his van was. And then he pushed the boat out onto the lake so that it would be found there. And then he had Mike's body, his best friend's body, in the back of his truck, which he drove home, got into bed with his wife so that he had an alibi. He'd actually planned to go hunting that morning with his father-in-law, Brian, And that was going to be, more of his alibi, make sure his wife sees him in bed. He cancelled his hunting trip with his father-in-law over the phone. And he went out to obviously go and deal with Mike's body. And when he left his house and he went to his truck, blood was dripping out of the back of his truck onto his drive. So he had to quickly clean up the drive, and then he had to drive to dispose of Mike's body. And he didn't even know what to do because this had not been the plan. The plan was that Mike would have drowned in the lake. He drove to a hardware store and collected some things to basically weigh down Mike's body. And his plan was to go to a different lake, and because now Mike has a bullet in his head, so he can't go back to the other river and say that he's drowned. So he goes to a different place and plans to weigh Mike's body down, but the river, the lake, has dried up. So all that there is like puddles everywhere. So he can't do that. So what he does instead is dig a grave, and he puts Mike's body in that grave. And then eventually that lake would fill back up with water and Mike would be buried in the bottom. There is so much betrayal in this case, because then everybody knew, like, Mike was so well loved. He was such a kind man. He even spent time volunteering and stuff like that. He was just a kind soul. He's a lovely person and well loved in his community. And Brian's dad treated Mike like a son. So when it became apparent that Mike was missing, Brian's dad was an integral part of the search for Mike. And he would be out on the boat, on his boat, with Brian until way into the night. And Brian was there knowing full well that Mike's body was not in that river, lake. He knew it wasn't there because he knew where it was. And he sat with his dad searching that lake until his dad was like tired and hungry, and he just would not give up. And then Brian's dad was the one that helped Denise get her life insurance policies pushed through, because he felt so sorry for Denise and their daughter that she wasn't going to be able to pay her bills, that when they found the waders and the jacket, it was Brian's dad that actually helped to push through the life insurance policies. What a betrayal. Like, oh my gosh, can you imagine when he found out that his son had actually killed Mike? Can you imagine? I might be wrong, so do correct me if I'm wrong. But from my research, what I gathered was that Brian was arrested, he was offered this deal, and then a couple of days after Brian was arrested, they found Mike's body. Okay, so Denise must have been like, oh my gosh, like he's told them. But I don't think they let on to Denise at that point. So what happened is Brian had his trial, his whole trial for the armed kidnap of Denise. So she might have then, as that all sort of like died down, like Mike's body was found, but nothing was said, no one arrested her. And then this trial happened for Brian. And I think it was almost a bit like she probably felt like a false sense of security, because she thought, maybe he's taken the fall for it, and maybe, or it was a coincidence that they found his body, what have you. So she was sitting pretty again, just thinking, Brian's going to go down, he's going to be out of my hair, and he hasn't said anything about Mike. But Brian knew different. He knew that this trial was like, he was being sentenced to 20 years. He knew it all, blah, blah, blah. And then I think it was a year and a half later after that they arrested Denise. And then her world came crumbling down and she would have discovered the truth. Brian testified against her in court. She was sentenced to 30 years for conspiracy to murder and life in prison for first-degree murder. However, that was actually squashed. I think because there was no evidence that she had physically actually murdered Mike, so that was taken away. So her life sentence was removed, but she has to serve 30 years, or had to. So she's probably served a chunk. She tried to appeal, denied. Good. And she was an actual vile piece of work. I mean, yeah, we know, you've heard the story, but Mike's mum, when Mike's mum was desperate And Mike was, she didn't believe that he'd been eaten by alligators, and she wrote 2,600 letters, for goodness sake. And Denise, in the early days, said to Mike's mum, if you pursue this anymore, you are not going to see your granddaughter. Now, if that doesn't scream guilt, what does? Why would you not want an investigation into your husband's weird, odd death?
When I went to the lake, God told me Mike was not in Lake Seminole. He didn't drown. He didn't get eaten by alligators. I had to find him and bring him home. For the next 17 years, I made telephone calls, put up missing person signs, compiled my notes into a book, and had people post on social media for me. I wrote 2,600 letters to the governor of Florida asking for help in finding my son. They told me Mike drowned and got eaten by alligators, and there was no need for an investigation. They laughed at me and called me crazy. 9 months after Mike disappeared, his wife, Denise, told me if I continued to seek a criminal investigation, I would lose Ansley, my granddaughter, Mike's only child. I knew that she knew where Mike was or what happened to him. I am a fighter, not a victim. I love Ansley, but Mike was my son. I became even more determined to find the truth. Not only did Denise kill my son, she stole my granddaughter, Ansley, Mike's only child. For her entire life, Ansley was raised in a house with the murderers of her father, while being denied the love of her father's family. She was told that Grandmama Cheryl was crazy and would hurt her. I will see my son clinging to a tree stump in Lake Seminole in the dark, knowing that his best friend is trying to kill him. I hear his voice screaming for help. I wasn't there to help him. It will haunt me.
The affair between Brian and Denise started in 1997, and Ansley, the daughter, Mike's daughter, was born in 1999. So who's to say who's the daddy? Also, a tragic fact is that Ansley was raised by the two people that murdered her dad. She never knew it until she was 19 years old, but that's who raised her. A silver lining, if you will, is that all of Mike's assets, all of the money that was left and property, was given to Ansley. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think I am. So she inherited everything, and Denise is not entitled to a thing. And that is all I have for you on today's case. What a case. Like alligators, Florida. I think Florida is a bit crazy, isn't it? I think lots of crazy stuff happens in Florida. I've been to Florida. I don't think I saw a crocodile or an alligator. I don't think so. We were on a coach going somewhere and someone was like, oh, gator. But I didn't see it. Although I would just be terrified if I saw one anyway. Even on a coach. So, I have something exciting to share with you all. I got my degree classification yesterday, and this one went and got myself a first class honours. So I got the highest level of degree that you can. I'm so glad because it was so stressful. And I still, every now and then, get the twitchy eye thing, and it's like, I like ruined my eyes doing that degree. So yeah, I'm really chuffed. Hence why I had some bubbles last night on a school night. Oh, on a school night. But it was worth it. I had to toast it because it was just, yeah, I had some tears. But it's just, yeah. And I want to ride the wave. I want to still be excited about it because it's just, I mean, what's that? Oh, it was a spider. It's a tiny one. I got scared. Yeah. It's an achievement. And, you know, I don't just want to be like, oh yeah, cool. I want to feel freaking buzzy about it. Every time I think about it, I'm like, oh my God. I did it. I'm excited. Yeah. Anyway, I was so excited to share it with you because it's like a full circle. I think for the entire time that I've been doing Sin and Tonic, I've been doing my degree as well. So it's over now. And happy days. And it said like, oh, you can put letters like after your name. Check me out. Right, I'm going to love you and leave you because I need to sit in a very comfortable chair with a cup of tea and have an early night and get in my pyjamas. I'm back. Oh, take my makeup off, jammies on, cup of tea, sofa, boom. And the final episode of Reacher. I'm looking forward to that. Anyone else watch Reacher on Amazon Prime? Bit of eye candy. He's crazy buff though. You know, like to the point where you just think, like you wouldn't want him to give you a hug, let alone anything else. You'd be like, oh, like accidental like headlock. I'm sure you'd get past it, but yeah, I always think that I'm like he's solid, like actually solid. Oh. Anyway, enjoy that if you will. If you decide to watch it, if I have sold it to you, give it a go. Love you very much. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you join me next week for another true crime story and a glass of gin. Love you, miss you, really wanna kiss you. See you next week. Love you. Bye.